How did chicken conquer the world? You will have all recognized what I'm holding between my finger, an egg, a chicken egg. One of the trillion eggs produced annually. In fact, at every moment on the planet, we do have 20 billion chicken. That is 3 chicken for every human being. These numbers are mind-blowing. In fact, the chicken has become so much part of our society that we can't even think about a world without it. But let's imagine a world without it. Let me give you 2 examples. A world without chicken and eggs will mean no pancake, no cakes, no dorowat for the Ethiopians, no sauce in the French cuisine. A world without chicken and its eggs will also mean that we will have to find new ways to produce some of our vaccine. Influenza, yellow fever, rabies are all produced using chicken eggs. In fact, in one single egg, we do find 5 to 25% of a daily requirement for vitamin, 10 to 15% of a daily requirement for protein. The chicken and its eggs have saved the life of millions of people and will continue to do so. How did it happen? How did it happen that the chicken became so indispensable to our society? To answer that question, we need to travel back in time and address 3 points. Who is the wild ancestor of domestic chicken? Where was it domesticated? And what was the domestication process? Charles Darwin, the famous Victorian naturalist, is the first one who have tried to answer the question of the domestic chicken origin. And in 2 of his books, he discussed about it, on the origin of the species and the variation of plant and animal under domestication. And for him, no doubt, the main ancestor of the domestic chicken is a red jungle fowl species living on the Asian subcontinent. But where in Asia? Indeed, the red jungle fowl has quite a very large geographic distribution, from the northern part of the Indian subcontinent to the southern part of Southeast Asia up to Indonesia and southern China. Well, we had to wait 2020 and with the publication of a study by a consortium, a worldwide consortium of scientists led by Chinese one, to have an answer to that question. In this paper, they are pinpointing a center of domestication in Southeast Asia at the boundary of Myanmar, East China, and North Thailand. Moreover, that paper, as well as other papers, including one paper from my PhD students, Dr. Lawal Rahman, also indicate the time of domestication, 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. That is during the golden age of plant and livestock domestication, during the Neolithic times. So, we don't know who is the wild ancestor, where it was domesticated, and when it was domesticated. But what about the domestication process? How did it happen in the past? Well, here I have to say I'm going to give you my biased scenario. Indeed, it's very difficult to go back in time and to find out what has been happening. But we can learn from today, from the today relationship between the people in the village, in the jungle, and the surrounding. And I wouldn't be surprised at all that 8,000, 9,000 years ago, chicken, the red jungle fowl, were part of the wildlife pet package of the small children, boys and girls. They would have wandered around the village and encounter hen with her newly hatched chicks. Difficult not to resist to all the small chicks when you see one. These children would have immediately capture the little one, and an imprinting process would have started. Alternatively, things could have been much more simple, with a hen and her chicks visiting the village in search of leftover grain or kitchen waste. A symbiosis process would have started, kitchen waste for the chicken, eggs for the villagers. Once domesticated, the chicken traveled across the wall, following human migration as well as terrestrial and maritime trading routes. 5,000 years ago, chicken husbandry was very common on the Indian subcontinent. 3,000 years ago, it was in Europe. 2,000 years ago, in Japan and Korea. But something remarkable happened here during this migration and movement. Not only chicken travel across the world in all directions, but along the way, it crossbred with local population of red jungle fowl living in different environments, as well as with other species of jungle fowl, species within the same genus Gallus. By the time it reached the African continent, it was a much more enriched species. The African continent is my continent of predilection. And here Egypt exemplifies how the chicken became so indispensable to the smallholder farmer. It is likely that the Egyptian became familiar with the birds through their contact with the Persian. The first evidence of domestic chicken in Egypt date from the reigns of the pharaoh Thutmose III, 1474 BC. The first evidence are actually a drawing of a rooster found by Howard Carter, the famous archaeologist. Initially, chicken were probably a zoological curiosity for the Egyptian. But 500 years later, we have evidence that the Egyptians were practicing artificial egg incubation. They had realized then that the chicken had this potential as a food producer. Very quickly, chicken dispersed across the African continent through Egypt, but also to another entry point to the Horn of Africa and today Ethiopia. We do find indigenous chicken in nearly all, if not all, in fact, agroecology of the African continent. But it has to be said that these indigenous village chicken are poor producer in comparison to the commercial egg layer and broiler, the tasteless broiler of a supermarket. And this is here that lay the future of the smallholder farmer chicken. Don't let me say wrong here. I'm not saying that we should be replacing the smallholder chickens from the farm with an exotic broiler and egg layer. It will be a disaster. There are countless examples of failure of exotic introduction of chicken. Rather, we should learn from this failure, and for our current knowledge on chicken, indigenous chicken of Africa, to design the chicken of the future for the smallholder farmer. A chicken combining productivity, environmental resilience, and adaptability. And this is the focus of a poultry research program for development at ILRI. But this is for another story. Thank you.